Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. So it's a real honor for me to be part of this. This is a really important topic, and for this to be all WSU and perhaps beyond, for me to have this opportunity is great. Yeah, so I've been watching on Zoom all day and appreciated all of the speakers' presentations and the thoughtfulness behind their content and the sharing of their own experiences, which I think really can bring this kind of topic home. And I hope attract the attention and the importance of this to everyone who hears this kind of topic and content. For me, I grew up in a family where disability was present. My father, born in 1918 in rural Nova Scotia, and at age 12 in 1930, scarlet fever was running rampant as a pandemic at the time. And it took the life of his sister, and it burned off the nerve endings in his ears and resulted in his having complete hearing loss. So when I came along in 1967, I was automatically born into a family where disability was present, and the need for accommodations is something that I grew up experiencing, seeing, and wanting and needing to participate in as a family member to help him. Thankfully, he had a really good eyesight, and he was able to lip read because there were no special education services at the time for hearing loss in rural Nova Scotia. So he learned to manage and do different jobs in the community. But certainly when you have lived the experience, it brings a whole new aspect to this, drives it home, I guess, and makes it real. It's not something that's just a job per se. You get into the experience of what it's like day to day. So I want to thank Dr. Joy Egbert, who is part of inviting me to do this. And her request was that I focus on UDL for writing. And in the research projects that I do, reading is always a component because writing and reading really complement each other. The two really do go hand in hand. Want to become a better writer? Read more high quality texts, see how they read, how they're organized, analyze them, and really try to apply that to your own writing. So my approach to today's talk is me as a writer, as an instructor, faculty at the university, and walking through the UDL components that are offered on the CAST website. And in special education, we focus a lot on the CAST content, Center for Applied Special Technology out of Boston, Massachusetts. So, and as I walk through those different components, I'm going to offer my own ideas or examples, as many as I can, as to what I feel could apply, what could be best practices, what could best help students generally in classrooms, but also students with disabilities, and especially cognitive disability, who tend to struggle the most with writing skills and therefore reading. So that's kind of my lens and way that I'm approaching this today. So, okay. So this is kind of my agenda, a short word cloud activity that I'm going to ask you to participate in a minute. And then the goals for the presentation, I'd like to talk a little bit just about where we are with writing in the United States. I think it's important to be aware and to reflect on how students are doing with writing. Very briefly, some of the laws and policies that apply to special education disability, the characteristics of students who struggle with reading and writing and learning, And then per the UDL framework, walking through strategy, practice examples that I feel could help address the needs of students who struggle with writing. And towards the end, I would just like to briefly highlight my own definitions, thoughts about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and culturally responsive practices, two highly promoted topics that I think map into the goals of UDL, and certainly for special education are highly mentioned topics of importance. So down here at the bottom, my ultimate goal in today's talk and in my own teaching and interaction with students and research is to improve students' access and to engage them to hopefully promote their ability to self-regulate, their ability to manage on their own to the greatest extent possible skills and activities that revolve around writing. So let's move into then the Menti activity. This is the first time I'm trying this. I've used Menti before, but not for a word cloud. So I'm going to ask you to either go to menti.com and use this 63798126 number, or you should be able to point your mobile device towards the screen or your computer monitor and the QR code, and it should take you to this a page that's similar to this with this picture. And I'm asking you if you could offer up to 5 words that you think of when you think of students' writing ability. It could be their strengths, it could be their weaknesses. So I'm just wondering how, what thoughts go through your mind when we talk about this topic? So I'll just give you a minute, and hopefully this will show up as you offer words. Okay, well, they keep coming in, which is great. And as I see the image change with all the different words, and the more they're mentioned, the bigger they appear on the screen, as I understand it. Yeah, critical thinking, so important to being able to work through the process and ideas. The ideas that you've read and learned about from whatever source of content you've been reviewing, and then trying to organize your ideas into generating your own text. Yeah, there's a lot to think about for sure. Bad spelling, that's a key one for students who tend to struggle with writing. But thankfully, technology can help with that to minimize that as a barrier, for sure. So I'm going to flip back to my slideshow just out of the interest of time. Okay, so some statistics about writing. We're in a really challenging state in the US in terms of writing ability. The National Assessment of Educational Progress is one national representative assessment offered about every 5 years or so for different areas of academics. And it's not the only source of writing. I'm also going to reference here some Smarter Balanced assessment scores. But in terms of an overall scope of how students do with writing, for example, in 8th and 12th grades, the second bullet in 2011, only 27% were at or above proficient. So there's a lot of students who really work their way through public school and will arrive at a university or college and still facing real struggles with writing. Reading, the first bullet, 34%. Washington State specifically was 38%, according to the National Assessment of Educational Progress. And just out of interest and comparison, math for 12th grade students in 2019 was 24%. Science was 22% at or above proficient. And then here at the bottom, for Washington, the state of Washington, its Smarter Balanced assessment score results, most recently, I think 2021. So for English language arts, it was 50.7%. succeeding, math 37.7, and science 42.7. So whichever way you look at it, there's still a lot of students struggling. And it's something that I think we need to recognize, reflect on, and try to work to address as best we can. So what does struggling with writing and reading, because they are so intertwined, really look like? And based on all of the research that I have reviewed, the conference sessions I've attended, my own experience in being a writer, in teaching courses about students who struggle with writing, learning disability, this is a list that I've come up with in the framework of a college classroom. And this could translate to other, late high school or maybe other grades as well, but this is my own current thinking based on all of my review and etc. So number one, when they come into class, can they focus their attention to understand the content? Because we know that attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, for example, is a real issue for many children. And how to address that, whether through medication or not, is highly controversial. But if you can't come in and attend and pay attention to absorb the content, you're missing a lot. And when it comes time to do the writing assessment, there's that whole portion of the course and content that student has missed. So that's one really important thing to be aware of. Number two is having the writing assignment explained in class. Taking the time to walk through what is expected. And I've learned myself that I can minimize the number of email questions I get, and therefore the amount of extra time that is required of me to try to address all that. If I can simply do it in class concisely when everybody's there, maybe a short video when I teach on Global Campus. But I also put rubric here, however you want to define a rubric. I think of it as, an explanation of the assignment, the components, the key questions, the key things that I'm expecting, APA 7th edition style, double-spaced. Some people feel that at the university level, you shouldn't need to go into that kind of level of exactness. I feel that it helps because it seems that students just appreciate the clarity. Number three, attaining answers to questions about the writing assignment. Do students have the opportunity to do that? Number four, reading the assigned text required of me before writing the assignment. That's really important that the students follow through on that. And emphasizing that even briefly during a given class session. It's really important that you be reading in chapter X because this subtopic is explained in more detail with more examples. You should really be going to that to find out more. Number five, finding source text to be referenced in my own writing so that they do their own research on the topics so that they have enough references for what you're expecting. Planning and organizing their ideas. Certainly, once they've reviewed all the content and material, then they need to come up with their own plan. And, if they're struggling with writing, they probably haven't mastered that. And that component, therefore, is going to be difficult. And one of the things that is suggested in research, writing instruction, and one of the things I found really helpful is modeling the process to start writing a text for a written assignment, for example, and that students better get to see the idea of how they can then start and work through the process. Not that that should take, a long period of time. Even 3 minutes would be could be very beneficial. Number seven, spelling words and creating sentences. So as I mentioned earlier, spelling is often a real challenge for these students, but browser apps, software can really help with catching misspelled words and trying to address that. Making your first draft especially if they don't know what ideas to begin with. Often reading their own writing is really challenging. Knowing what edits to make. And then, is it possible for them to obtain feedback, even from a peer or the writing center on campus when they seek it? And then hopefully, number 12 is attaining a good grade on their writing assignments, B or higher. How well did they do with that? So there's a lot to writing, and sometimes I've tried to think about, between reading, writing, and math, the core subjects that we go through in the public school grades, which is more difficult. But certainly writing is up there in terms of being challenging with all the things that are needed to bring the process together. So what are some takeaways then from the data? Well, it's certainly number one that academic skills improvement is really challenging during public school. And this often persists into post-secondary university level. Number two, we shouldn't assume that students have high skill levels when entering university or college. Number three, we live in an ever more challenging knowledge-based economy world. And we need to be willing to rethink how we approach writing, the expectation of writing assignments, so that we can better promote student success. Number four, COVID has exacerbated all of these issues. The recent SAT scores are one example of that were mentioned just this week in the public media. I forget exactly how the news article read, but not good or the worst in recent years, or something to that effect. And then number five, and this is the biggest challenge I've come to see in the research projects that I've been doing about writing and with colleagues at the Pullman campus, is students' conclusion, belief, idea of learned helplessness. I have not had success to date. It is unlikely I will succeed by trying again now. Why should I bother? I write a first draft the night before, I scribble something down and I hand it in. I've had students in research projects with interviews tell me that, multiple students tell me that. I don't know, I've tried for 12 years, now I'm here. It's just not something I'm good at. I'll do the best I can the night before. I'm not going to stress myself out about it. And whatever I get, I get. And that mindset is a hard thing to change when it becomes so ingrained. And that's kind of the current challenge, big idea that I, with my research colleagues and others, am trying to figure out a way to try to address, and how could that be changed? Okay, so at the the post-secondary university level, we're expected to follow the Americans with Disabilities Act, to not discriminate against people with disabilities. We're also impacted by Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, also prohibiting discrimination on the basis of disability. And more recent amendments to ADA have broadened the agencies and businesses that must comply. So for universities and colleges, here at the very bottom, we talk of reasonable accommodations. And that's a very politically charged word in a way, because paired to that is the word modifications. So in public school, when a student is on an IEP, they have the option of having both accommodations and modifications. And generally, modifications refer to a student who, for example, is in 7th grade, but they're operating at a 3rd grade level of reading, writing ability. So their activities, content, assessment, curriculum materials can be lowered closer to a 3rd, 4th grade level of ability, something that's closer to what they can manage. Accommodations often refer to things like extra time, or use of a calculator. We're not really changing the grade level content expectations per se. So we're just offering added resources to help them to be able to manage and promote their skills. But at the university level, modifications, don't exist. We only accommodate. So when these students arrive at university, it's quite a shock. It's a real change for them. Something for them also to be challenged with. And I listed here more specifically, exit criteria are not modified. So, you can get accepted and come to the university, attend classes and do your courses. But when it comes to the ultimate criteria to pass classes and what's required of your program, you're going to have to do the same as what everybody else does, because the university, wouldn't be changing that. Another thing to think about is the Higher Education Opportunities Act, which actually specifies in public law UDL and its different components and characteristics. And we've had discussions and presentations about that earlier, so I won't spend more time on that. So what are some example associated titles then, again, to help us orient to this topic for struggling readers and writers? Well, learning disability is the prime one. So traditionally, it's been about 50% of students in special education, or about 4 to 6% of the general population. But that has changed a bit in terms of special education, with more recent methods to assess and place students in special education. Basically, a turning away from the use of standardized tests have changed the 50% in special education down to, I think, somewhere around 40%. In terms of the students with a learning disability, about 75 to 80% have it in the area of reading and writing, and only about 25% have it in math. But once you're in public school on an IEP, and if you're listed as having a learning disability in math, but if you need accommodations for reading, it can be included, because the IEP offers you that opportunity or flexibility to include modifications for whatever the student needs based on their disability. Another term that can often be associated with students who struggle with writing in particular is speech and language disorders, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, autism, traumatic brain injury also, which often demonstrates itself similar to characteristics of a learning disability. So given the reality of the number of students who are challenged with writing, and the reality that disability exists, and it's something we need to work to accommodate, be inclusive, and to help students, I think it's also important that we remember that these students can still have a lot of success. And there's a number of people, many of these names I think are familiar to many of us, who have had a learning disability or talked about their own experience and basically described a learning disability, and yet they've had a lot of success in life. So it doesn't mean that a given student can't be successful. They certainly can be. I read Agatha Christie's autobiography, and she talked about her difficulty with putting words together and spelling. And she talked about how, it persisted into all of the years of her life. And that's typical of a disability. It tends to be lifelong. And so something to be aware of, and something that, doesn't go away by university level years. But nevertheless, students can grow up to have a lot of success in life. And I think it's important that we always try to be aware of that. I think what would be good to do as well is, wherever you can, is to highlight this in your own class. whatever topic, there's probably someone here from your given subject area that you could talk about in class. Even include a reading about them, or maybe something that they wrote about their experience. I think could help illustrate to students, all students, and especially those with a disability, that success is possible. We can all get there. So moving then to the components of UDL, the why, the what, and the how, and I won't spend time on this because we talked about it already. So I'll go into now more of my own thoughts and examples of strategies and practice ideas that could help people with difficulties in writing and reading to better have more success in university level classrooms. So I'm a big believer, for example, in individual choice. I feel that there's so many topics, and I'll use special education as my example. There's 14 disability categories in federal law in the United States. And when I teach a class about disability, I don't really feel that I want to narrow that choice for students, because I know that they often have had their own experiences, or they know someone with experience with a given disability, or something just really interests them. And I would like them to have the opportunity to explore what it is that is of interest to them. So I offer them choice on their topic. I don't choose it for them. Inevitably, there are a few students who feel, I would really rather just be almost told what to do, sometimes is the way it's phrased. And I include in my, what I call rubric or description of the assignment, some example ideas that they can use if they want to do that. But I really think individual choice is a huge motivator for them to do a written assignment, to go through the components, the process, and hopefully come up with a better product as compared to me just choosing something. The importance of relevance, value, authenticity, relating it to real life, I think is really important. When we can relate a topic, subtopic to something they see and experience, maybe that they have witnessed, it becomes more real to them, and it's going to be more meaningful and retained in memory for later use, which we all need to do, especially in writing, being able to draw from those ideas. So to sustain effort and persistence, salience of goals and objectives. Yeah, what's the purpose of the assignment? Writing that down, discussing it in class. Collaboration and community group work. I do that in my own classes, that they have the opportunity to work together. It's not necessarily for an individual written assignment. Typically, it's a presentation. But in the process of doing the presentation, they will be doing writing. And I offer students the opportunity to choose their own group. So I think it just somehow works better when they have that flexibility, because they know themselves as a group much better than me. And the importance of feedback is really important. And I sometimes, not in all classes, but if you can, provide the opportunity for them to do a draft, maybe a presentation, offer them feedback, and then later they'll be able to apply that feedback in a written text that you ask them to do. Okay, so this first sub-bullet here, instructors modeling the process. Yeah, this is something that's really important when you're asking them to do an activity, including doing a writing assignment. If you can walk through the steps of how you would do that as a writer, so that they can see, what kind of resources are you going to get out to have on hand, websites, and it helps to verbalize all your own thoughts as you're doing that. Again, just spending even 1 to 3 minutes of walking through the process of how you would manage the writing assignment in your class, so that they can see that. to better know and manage that on their own when they're later doing it on their own. Providing descriptions, the steps, the process. Oh, reminders, weekly emails. I do this especially in online classes where at the end of the week, I kind of summarize the activities that they have done and give them another alert of what's expected in the upcoming week, and any kind of issues. Also where I'm at in my grading, so that they're aware, I've now finished all the grading of anything submitted to date, and you can find that in the Canvas gradebook, so that they can be aware of, where to find how they're doing, and therefore pose questions if they need help for next steps. So I found weekly emails, especially in online classes, really helpful. Providing models and exemplars for a written assignment is a really good practice and something that students often appreciate. Sometimes I've had even almost demand. And if you're wondering what one example, to me, one really good example looks like, in this Google slide file, if you go to this slide, you can click on this particular phrase where it says smarter balanced, and it will take you to the full PDF online. But for the smarter balanced assessment, they have exemplars of what a low, medium, and high quality example look like, and the given score that was given and why it was given, what could have been improved. Now, I know I don't feel I have the time to make the kind of PDF that this is, but I think it illustrates an idea that even if we could do it as one example this semester and maybe add another one next time we teach the course, it would give more ideas and clarity, I think, to students in terms of what is expected and how they could do better. So I found those to be really helpful, offering an exemplar of what the assignment or a high quality example even would look like. Yeah, the whole idea of perception, offering different modalities, vision, hearing, touch, use of closed captioning. And I agree with the previous, and maybe it was other speakers today as well who mentioned the importance of having closed captioning on. So I really try to do that. And I don't know if I have the option to do it here. It is already. Oh, good. So yeah, it's just another way for them to see and receive the information. And especially for students who are ELL, I think it can be really helpful. So it's always a good practice to do that, and to have the transcript offered to them if that can help too. Illustrations, as we do here, typically within PowerPoints, like offering an image paired with the text is really helpful. Infographics. And here in the large image, I put, sorry that it's kind of small, but hopefully on bigger screens it appears larger. But it's basically the executive functioning system or information processing system and how we learn. And it's, again, an illustration of how complicated learning can be. But yet for some people, like most of us, I think probably almost all of us, I'm guessing, who's listening today, this whole system works very fluently. And, we can just bounce from one component to the other. At the very top, there's an external stimulus, for example, me talking, and you're receiving that information by listening, the auditory and the visual, seeing me, and you're attending, you're focusing your attention, and you're perceiving it, you're making sense of it through the vocabulary, the content, the words that you already have in your long-term memory to be able to pair with what I'm saying as I'm talking to make sense of it. Perhaps you're typing, you're making notes, and therefore using your working and immediate memory to be able to rephrase these ideas into your own words. And then as you receive this new information, you're trying to retain it in memory. It could be through rehearsal, through repeating it a few times, organizing it, chunking it into subtopics or elaboration, maybe through an image. And imagery can be really helpful to helping people generate ideas during writing. It's one of the things that I've used in my own projects that have helped. So students don't need to get bogged down into spelling words or creating phrases. Even if they could create an image of their idea of the timeline or sequence of their text, it could be really helpful for them to later use as a reference, as a visual outline, to then be able to actually start generating words and sentences. And then at the bottom, you know, we have different kinds of memory. We have the declarative memory for facts, data, procedural memory for how to do things, conditional memory, how we respond to stimuli and events. And on the bottom right, we have episodic memory. An episode happens. You know, I remember very vividly where I was on 9/11. I remember coming home from middle school, 8th grade, when Ronald Reagan was attemptedly assassinated in 1983, I think it was. So whenever you can pair your topic to some kind of key event, or you know, some teachers will dress up as Abraham Lincoln, for example, when they talk about him for a certain, you know, class topic. Music, I mean, whatever way you can create an ambiance, create a memorable moment for students around your topic, it's going to help retain that information and make it meaningful and maintain their attention while you're doing that. And then semantic memory there on the left, general world knowledge. So it's a complicated system. And, you know, if you can't attend, right, if you can't maintain your attention, you can see all the different components that a student's going to be missing. So there are different factors that play in, and we all play a part, the student too, to be able to work to address the areas that aren't working well. I'm another great believer in mnemonic strategies for writing. For whatever genre of writing might be part of your course subject area, the steps in doing the type of writing task that you're asking them to do could be more meaningful, easier to do and apply if perhaps you talk about it in class with a short mnemonic. So this is a simple one of the first that I created for story writing. Ask, reflect, text, ART, right? The acronym. And the A for ask, so who, when, where, what happened to the characters in your story, etc. The R for reflect, illustrating your answers in a drawing. And in this case, they used an iPad drawing app. And then once they had their drawing, then they would start generating their text from that visual outline. So mnemonic strategies are great because you can create them however you want, right? There's no one way to do that. I worked with a 4th grade teacher, and she spent a few minutes in a given lesson creating a mnemonic on the content they had just covered with the class. So the instructor with the class made the mnemonic, and therefore it really was theirs. Promotes ownership, and hopefully that they will use that. But managing the steps is really important. Language and symbols, clarifying vocabulary and symbols. And vocabulary makes me think of the frustration, anxiety, and tension video. It's called FAT, F-A-T, City video. I should have put it on here. It's free on YouTube. And if you haven't watched it, he's very entertaining. Dr. Mel Lavoie, I think from Virginia or somewhere in mid-Atlantic states, does a simulation with a group of teachers and adults and parents about what having a learning disability is like. And one of the sections of the video uses some very common words, which were from a math textbook. So he first presented the list of very simple words, and then showed them the paragraph description of a math assignment. And all of a sudden, those very simple words became really complicated. And only one person in the room who was an engineer really understood what it meant. So vocabulary, is a funny thing, and experience is really important in being able to know and apply vocabulary. Knowing how to spell the word necessarily is not enough. Another idea that came to mind here is the options to change the size of text. And I'm a huge fan of e-readers. I know some people love the physical feel of a book. There's another word I'm thinking of, aesthetic of a book or something. Just to have something tangible in your hand and to be able to turn the pages. But to have it, on your iPad, less weight to carry a whole lot of books in your iPad through an e-reader, plus have the option of changing the size of text, making notes, to me is just a huge help. So those kinds of ideas can really help students too. And here too, I made the note about the importance of self-talk when we're trying to offer ideas to someone else about how to manage writing. The thinking behind the writing, the doing, the product can be really helpful to help them understand what to do. In terms of comprehension, I did put it here. This link here, the first one in green, if you go to this slide, Google Slides, I think you'll be taken directly to that video and the 5 or 7 minutes where he talks about that. The math paragraph made of very simple words initially. So in terms of comprehending, another idea I thought about was the importance of blanking on the word for this, graphic organizer, advanced organizer, right here in the title, Mountain Advanced Organizer. So when you're presenting a topic, for example, at the beginning of your lesson, have an image that illustrates some of the key ideas of what it is that you're going to be talking about, and including the key words of vocabulary to give each of them meaning with a visual clue. It helps all of us as visual learners. It certainly helps students who are ELL, again, to get that visual image meaning of the word as opposed to just something in a language that maybe they're not as familiar with. So that's really important and can be really helpful. In a similar way, I put here specially designed academic instruction in the third bullet. So this comes from the ELL professional community. Don't use pronouns. We should really be using the noun when we're talking about something and describing something. When we get into this one, that one, the other one, it, whatever the pronoun is, it's harder sometimes for people to track what exactly it is that you're referring to, especially when there's multiple keywords going on. So having the visual really helps, and using the specific noun in your talk and discussion is really helpful. And also pointing when you can to make it very specific as to what you're referring to in a diagram or the specific word in a text. So the use of nouns is really important, and the use of pointing to that particular part is really important. Another idea about comprehension I had was explaining the assignment's purpose to a life practice, so that what I'm asking you to do actually does serve a real purpose. Gaining your knowledge to help you in your professional career when you leave the university, for example. There's probably other more direct ideas that maybe you could come up with in your own subject area. And also the idea of how this could apply to other situations. So in writing research, when we develop a strategy, earlier I talked about the ART mnemonic. So for story writing, that was its original intention. But when we have learned that and applied it a few times on the part of the student, we should also be talking about how they could apply that to other aspects of writing, like a historical narrative, maybe. They want to talk about, an event in history or the life of a famous person. So one given strategy surely can apply to other types of writing or contexts. So there's multiple possible benefits to learning this and being able to apply it. Varying the methods of response and navigation. So this made me think of the importance of, in feedback, giving 2 points of praise. And I always try to do that when, I'm giving feedback, that all of my feedback is meant to be helpful, and it's meant to, improve the quality of the product if all these edits could be made. But it's also really important, especially for students who struggle with writing, to give them some elements of praise that they did something right. And it may seem minuscule to us, but to someone who's struggling in that given area, you've made their day, and they're probably not going to, jump up and down in your class to show appreciation, right? It wouldn't be socially acceptable to their peers to do that. But inside, at least, I'm sure that it's going to have a really positive impact. So 2 points of praise, and at least, of course, 2 points of feedback of improvement. And usually there's more than 2. But I went through a later literacy writing intervention program, and those kinds of ideas were really emphasized. So I thought I'd share them here. Optimize access to tools and technologies, so text-to-speech, speech-to-text, browser apps that can help with grammar, spelling. Microsoft Editor is another one that's come along, very helpful. Another key idea that's mentioned in writing research to help people who struggle with writing is how to go about teaching a new strategy. And self-regulated strategy development is one of the most cited. So Steve Graham and Karen Harris are husband and wife, longtime researchers in the area of struggling writers, learning disability and writing, currently at Arizona State University. And they developed SRSD, which has 6 steps. So the first one is we should assess background knowledge of the student, what they can and can't do in terms of writing. And then for the chosen strategy, maybe it's a mnemonic strategy to help students improve with that given kind of text and genre, we would discuss it with the student to show them how it could help them improve. And then we cognitively model the strategy. And this is where the self-talk really becomes important. So as the instructor is showing how to work through the steps, ask, reflect, text, they're verbalizing all those inner thoughts, right? Gonna get out my key questions that answer what should be in a story, the who, when, where, what happened, etc. I'm gonna get out my iPad with the art apps so that I can illustrate my answers and then be able to type my text afterward. What's also important is considering to memorize the strategy, that students commit to memorizing it, to internalize it, that it be automatic, so that there's really very little mental energy that's needed for them to be able to retain what the steps are. Then number 5, collaboratively supporting the strategy. So the teacher, instructor, and the students working through the process together to generate a basic, good kind of text that's the purpose. And hopefully getting to the point of independent performance and maintenance, maintaining the strategy, use of the strategy over time, which includes a discussion of how we could apply this to other kinds of writing. So this is something that's highly promoted and probably intuitive for many of us, but maybe not necessarily organized in this kind of order, which for me was certainly helpful when I saw it. So there are practices that we often use that are kind of intuitive to us and we've done on our own. But to know more specifically what would be good in terms of teaching something to somebody else can be very helpful. Yeah, expression and communication, ideas from the UDL website, rounds of feedback. I noted as something that's really good to do. And I know in the writing projects that I've done with colleagues in Pullman in science, microbiological sciences, they do that, which is a wonderful practice. I also put here the results from a research study by Steve Graham and colleagues. The full reference is here at the bottom. They did a meta-analysis of different ways to teach writing, and they calculated the effect size. What would be the impact? What would the probability of success be if students used a given kind of strategy and method in teaching writing? And here they list quite a long list of different kinds of ways to go about teaching writing. So SRSD, which I just described, self-regulated strategy development, rated quite highly, 1.17. So the negative one here is grammar instruction. So probably many of us remember grammar books going through public school. I remember in grade 10, 11 English, there was 3 or 4 books we had to complete all about grammar and syntax. And it had 6 rows of questions, and you worked through all the top row questions and you had to do a test. And if you didn't pass, you had to do test 2. And if you didn't pass test 2, you had to redo all of the top thing again. And thankfully, I managed them all without having to retake a test, but it was monotonous. I mean, I think I did learn, but I don't think it was interesting. It wasn't engaging, really. Maybe it was efficient for the teacher, but amongst all the different ways that we can think about writing, that kind of method is not considered effective with a negative effect size. So just something to think about. Other things about executive functioning, goal setting, planning, monitoring progress. And I put here at the bottom a really good practice that has been suggested within the College of Education when the blue course evaluations came out, but I think I was doing it myself beforehand, was offering students a mid-semester course evaluation that you as the instructor make. You know, some people do it as short as, what do you like about class? Number 2, what would you change? But some kind of feedback about the course mid-semester that, you know, if something isn't going well, you know, it probably would be good to try to change that. Or how could you change your instruction or change the materials or the resources to better address that part of the course, if it is about writing, to work better for students for the last half of the semester. So I have found that really helpful, and students have appreciated, you know, that I'm welcome to their input. I tell them that on day 1, but I know it's harder to confront someone face to face as opposed to an anonymous survey. And I just use SurveyMonkey and its generic link, so I can't track who said what. But it's just an efficient way to do that. Another important point here about monitoring progress is having feedback, and each campus has its own writing center. I'm part of a project with colleagues in Pullman where we're offering for STEM classes an eSTEM writing center. You can visit it within the Spark building at Pullman Tuesday evenings, but students from any campus can also access that eSTEM Writing Center via Zoom. So if you want to scan that QR code, then you should be able to find the information and offer that to your students. The focus is on STEM types of writing for this particular project, but it's another resource for you to be aware of. So very close to the end, I think second last slide. So in thinking about universal design for learning and its whole approach of trying to be inclusive, trying to be aware of all the student needs in your classroom and working to welcome and bring everyone into what could benefit them to promote their skills to the best that it can happen. So very similar to that, in my opinion, are concepts about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I've come up with my own definition. I had a student ask me to share my thoughts at her class on this, and this is what I came up with. So being respectful and civil to others, whatever their race, ethnicity, culture, sexual orientation, disability. And that concept of equity is that people be offered provided what they need, not that everyone gets the same thing. So some students may need extra time, and that's okay. Some students may really benefit from that Grammarly app to help with spelling. That's okay. We need to be flexible. I think that's a key sub-theme within UDL. And inclusion, providing for people to access and improve in all aspects of life. That inclusion is not a place, because in education, there's a common phrase, the inclusion classroom. We're referring to the general ed classroom, right? Your grade 6 classroom. If you want inclusion, you got to go there. That's not really what inclusion is. So it's not a place. It's a set of practices that should happen everywhere. Self-contained classrooms for students with, a given high level of disability, that can be okay because it addresses the needs of those students in a smaller setting with a teacher who's really trained on the strategies and practices that can best help students with that disability type. And inclusion practices happen there too. Happens at the bus stop, the grocery store, wherever we are. And then finally, culturally responsive practices. And this is from the perspective of an instructor working through their syllabus and their class materials and resources, their classroom practices. Are we offering students access to various perspectives on topics? So you may choose a textbook, but you shouldn't glue yourself to the textbook. The textbook may be authored, for example, by a white person. Are there podcasts, videos of people from other races, cultures, languages that you could add within your Canvas space to give students the opportunity to see and hear from people of other experiences? Really think about what diversity, equity, and inclusion topics can be related to your course. How is students' knowledge integrated into your classroom? There was a comment in a recent presentation here at the university by our chancellor, that incoming students of the age who are about to enter university, are asking about their own life experiences and etc. work experiences to be part of the count in terms of what the university requires. Not sure how all that will work, but that's kind of the idea that they've posed. And then finally, do you employ a mix of presentation of content, small group discussions, video segments, etc.? Really try to vary the kind of things that you do in class to, again, help maintain their interests, students' interest, and therefore be better prepared to manage that writing assignment when it happens. I'm surprised. I thought I wouldn't go to full hour, but I did. So questions, comments?